want to get your attention back, and I want to do an experiment. And I was inspired by the fantastic presentation of Bloomberg New Energy Finance Martin when he was showing the Gartner curve. And the Gartner curve that is going up, is going down, and is going up again. So could you stand up, please? And we're going to make that movement and really try to make it very physical for the discussions that we have ahead of us. Because we want to all show that we are going up in the slope again, and I think we call it slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. So we start with the hype, right? The hype. Yeah, we're going down, and we're going up again. And we stop at the productivity, and we want to do that. We want to enlighten you now with the discussions that we're going to have. Pick it up. Thanks for the exercise, and thanks for participating. So it was really a tryout. So we want to pick it up in this panel from what we heard in the last round of discussions in the previous panel, when there was a discussion around we need to secure offtake, coming from the industrial side of things, but then moving into what does it need? We need to secure offtake. There's a great opportunity out there, right, to decarbonize the demand that is difficult to decarbonize, to look into the opportunities of decarbonizing the hard-to-abate sectors. But as we also heard previously, there is a lot of supply, or at least there is supposed to be a lot of supply, but the demand is still missing. I noted down the figure, 12% of the supply only has offtake. And out of that 12%, 90% of these offtake agreements are non-binding. So in this panel, we want to look into how we can change that, how we can also have lead markets, because that's the one idea that we do also hope to see in the Clean Industrial Deal going forward, or in any of the ideas that the European Commission, that Ursula von der Leyen has been putting forward. So I'm very happy that I'm joined with a fantastic panel. We have Christian Fauduc, who is the CTO of Smartenergy. Thanks very much for joining. Frauke Thies, you're the Executive Director of Agora. And I'm very much looking forward to insights, because you have also published some reports on lead markets. And then last but not least, we have Kimmo Järvinen, I hope I pronounce it well. Yeah, Head of European Governmental Affairs of SSAB. And you will... Okay, so there was too much movement out there. Yeah, I mean, we heard in the opening statement of Ursula von der Leyen that from her perspective, things are going well. We have the best possible and the world's first framework when it comes to the regulatory side of things. She was also mentioning a couple of projects. And he was very hopeful that there's huge demand ahead, right? But that we just need to, the European Commission needs to help to scale up supply. What we hear from the market is a little bit different, so the demand is lacking. And this is why I would like to start with you, Christian, because I want to first hear from you the regulatory framework. We have quotas, we have production rules, we have now the hydrogen bank. So is there anything missing that you maybe haven't heard in the previous panel yet?
Yes. In fact, I think we have sufficient rules. We have, luckily and you mentioned the hydrogen bank, a simple approach somehow to give support to some of the projects. But maybe I should really dive right away into concrete examples. Concrete example, how to get the demand. We are engaging into, for example, a ceramic project in Spain. And if I come first from the side of the willingness to pay, so because you need to get these two sides together, your cost and the willingness to pay, with the funding mechanism and the rules you have. So if I do the calculation, I will simplify a little bit. We get, if we assume natural gas price at 40 euro roughly, then we get to a topic that when you look into the sensitivity analysis on, and that's now the major thing, the CO2 price. The CO2 price we saw before, also by Bloomberg, is the major independent factor to move the industry to decarbonize. And we have seen that it dropped from almost 100, or we reached 100, I think, a CO2 price per ton, almost below 60 in the meantime. And now, if we assume where we are right now, we get to a willingness to pay off this industry, and that's what we discuss with them. When I say a ballpark, 225. 225, we're ready to pay. Okay, now you can obviously say, okay, what do you assume? What we need is the CO2 pricing to be fair and to include everything, and how sensitive is that? So if we increase over time to the 100, which we were again, then we increase roughly by 30 cents to 55-ish. If we increase another one to 150, which is where we want to go, we get another 30 cents to 85-ish. 200 is the magic number, which we think a lot of industry can really work, and which is a fair CO2 price considering all the effects. We get to 325-ish, and then the gap is not that big anymore, and then we can understand hydrogen bank. Hydrogen bank, we saw that the element you got there was roughly a little bit below 50 were the ones which got the support. Okay, and then we almost can close the gap, but you need still to pile up some funding. So that's the one message I want to say is what I expect. Well, we need also on a global scale get this mechanism working, because this is the fundamental which works almost also without subsidy. If I come from the other side, and then I quote another project of ours, which is in aviation. We know great, there is a binding quota by 2030. Also the timeline is something to discuss. But if we do the math, and again, just ballpark, we get, and by the way, electricity, we heard before, kind of 2,600 per ton is already the cost just by the electricity. But if you pile up then the hydrogen production, the SAF production, and the logistics, everything, maybe 4,500 is the cost per ton of eSAF, of kerosene, e-kerosene. Then we have luckily some byproducts we can evaluate. We get to roughly 4,000. Now comes, okay, what is the effect of the support mechanism? And the support mechanism leads that you get, if you get these support of €0.50, you will drop kind of by 5%, 4,000 to 3,800. If you get then €1, roughly, I simplify it, 3,000, 3,800, 600, and 150 maybe, but will we get support of 150? Unlikely. And now comes the hard truth, is that today it's 1,000, what you can roughly say is what is paid in the market. So, okay, there is a binding quota, but despite the mechanisms, we have still a huge gap which you needs to kind of allow to pile up whatever support you can get. And you need mechanisms which make it credible that this penalty, and maybe I'm a bit long maybe right now, but then it will be short afterwards, that you have the penalty today saying, okay, you will pay double the difference of the market price to the average LCOA of eSAF as a penalty. So that's kind of a strong incentive. However, there are two issues with that. The one is, well, it kicks in only in 2030. So before, probably you just go with biofuel, which is much cheaper. It should be below 3,000. And by now, you cannot start the projects because who will right now commit at this early stage with this price gap? So saying all that, it's a nice mechanism, but the reality shows we still have a challenge to get to these final investment decisions due to these gaps which are not fully overcome. Okay,
still a huge price gap. We don't know yet what penalties will bring. I mean, there's one project where this is not an issue, it seems, anymore, because SSAB is already producing since 2021, if I'm not mistaken, fossil-free steel, the first one worldwide, right? And you're selling it to clients and to Volvo, I read on your webpage. So you're doing it. So what does your project make special? And maybe you could just share a little bit your experience.
Yeah, thank you. Madam. And first of all, now what I present is strictly from the steel industry point of view. So I cannot speak for any other industries. And one of the important factors for SSAB, Swedish Steel, was that already 2014, 2016, we realized that our old blast furnaces in Sweden and in Finland, Sweden we have 2 of them, Finland we have 2 of them, they were becoming of an age to be renovated. And we had to, our top management at that time had to sort of look around and see what is the future. What is it that will be happening in the future? How will the world look like? How will the steel market look like in the future? Because of the fact that the steel plant investments are typically made for 15 to 20 years. So the existing blast furnaces have been there for a long, long time. So you don't make the investment decision on a short-term basis, on a short-term market fluctuation. You make them by looking at what will be happening in the future. And at that time, and now I'm speaking, I emphasize I'm speaking 2015, so almost 10 years ago. At that time, the top management made a decision that, and looked at the market and looked around and saw that, okay, the decarbonization or climate change mitigation of fossil fuels will be banned, and there will be a problem with the emissions. And we have to do something which is longer lasting than the next few years. And they came to a conclusion that we need to develop and we need to investigate the technologies which allow us to reduce the emissions. And coming from Finland and coming from Sweden, you know that our governments, to start with, are very environmentally conscious. So they already at that time were speaking about having the carbon neutrality target for 2035, 2040 or something like that. And they realized that if they invest at that time, or 2020 or 21, to the blast furnaces, they will not live the full lifetime at all. So it doesn't make sense financially to invest in technology which we already know that will be outdated in 23 or 2025. So they made a decision at that time that we will start to investigate, we will study whether there is a technology or technologies that allow us to decarbonize the steel manufacturing. And for those of you who may know, maybe all of you know, but you may know, the present steel production technology produces roughly 10% of this world's CO2 emissions. 10%. So Finland and Sweden, I say Finland first because I'm a Finn, but I work for a Swedish company, but the fact is that these countries would not be able to become carbon neutral if they wouldn't be converting these 2 plants or 3 plants into a fossil-free steel production. So my point being this, it is a long-term thing. It cannot be based on what is happening today or what is happening tomorrow. It has to be the people who decide to invest in these technologies, they have to see above the cyclical industry, and steel industry is, and metal production is a cyclical industry. They have to be able to see above that cycle. And at that time they saw it and they made a decision. We have been following that decision ever since, and it has proven to be right in the sense that at least in this Brussels bubble we have been praised many times of showing the way to the carbon.
It's great to have visionary companies like yours, obviously, but you're also operating in an environment where, you know, in the steel market there's a lot of oversupply. So how are you dealing with that?
This is a much more difficult question actually than the previous one. The previous one was easy. Technological leadership gives you edge in the market. Now, in the steel industry, again, I'm speaking only for the steel industry, there is a significant overcapacity in this world. Part of the reason is that steel is considered a strategic material. For many, many countries in this world, they think that they have, and they see that they have to have their own steel production for their own environmental and also for their own economical development reasons. So they invest and they subsidize the investment in one way or another. And indeed, this has caused the situation where we are today, and I repeat, this is a cyclical industry, so this may not last for long, but today we are in a situation where in this world altogether we have roughly 550 million tons of excess capacity when the total European consumption is only 150 million. So the excess capacity could fill European demand 3-4 times, fourfold. So indeed, it is a problem. Next week, there is organized by OECD, there is a global forum for steel excess capacity meeting in Paris. I have been there for 10 years, and the OECD countries who are getting together, they try to solve this problem by agreeing that, okay, there needs to be some sort of form of reduction of the capacity because it's hurting everybody, the overcapacity. And now we are not talking about fossil-free, we are talking all over all kinds of steel production. So indeed, this is a problem, and it is a fundamental structural problem. It is not just something that will go away in few years, and it has to be solved. And there is a very, very difficult dilemma in that many countries see steel production as so strategic industry to have that they want to become almost self-sufficient. Now, that would be fine if there would be all the time increasing demand, and if there wouldn't, overall in this world, if there wouldn't be enough capacity, but that is not the case. The demand is not growing so fast, overall 2-3% a year, and in many countries there is already today oversupply. So here we are dealing a really difficult political and societal, economical problem, and my personal view, and I think many of my colleagues think that the only solution to this specific issue is the fact that the countries have to agree together. They have to come to, as they are trying to do, they have to come together and agree on some sort of rules and terms by which we will avoid to have such a huge amount of excess capacity that suddenly the market is flooded with cheap steel and sometimes very low quality steel, and then in that way distorting the whole market. I know that this is not a clear answer, but this is the only one that, to our understanding, is at the moment, because otherwise we end up competing against each other, and that is even worse. The outcome is even worse if we cannot agree on this.
Okay, we're picking up on that again, but let's come back to the hydrogen market. But you wanted to react to it, Frauke? Otherwise, I have a question to you.
Well, ask your question, and then I can see.
Okay. I mean, I will be still asking that question on the lead markets, but first, I wanted to know from you, in the outgoing commission now, what have they done good, well, and what is it that might still be missing? Or maybe let's concentrate on what they've been doing well. Ursula von der Leyen was very upbeat in her remarks in the beginning, talking about the regulatory framework, but also about a lot of projects where we are ahead of the US. So how do you judge what has happened so far? You've been working a lot on hydrogen, I know. So maybe you could just provide your analysis.
Okay. Well, I think by and large, it's fair for Europe to claim leadership. Europe has shown leadership, and I think one thing that's been mentioned is the green hydrogen standards, which are basically a global benchmark, and a couple of countries are basically building also their discussions on the European standards now. But I think also in terms of the place that the European Commission has given green hydrogen in the overall framework on energy system integration, basically the role they recognize for green hydrogen in a increasingly electricity-based European energy system. So I think there has certainly been leadership there. Of course, if you want to create a market on green hydrogen, what you need is both the supply side as well as the demand side to match and pick up. On both of them, Europe has, of course, done work, both with the auctions, but then also with the quotas for industry, for transport. And yet, we think that more could be done on the demand side, especially before the background that you just described, Kimmo. And I think an important response there is, again, also lead markets. And we can go back into that again later, because I think, yes, you're right in terms of the limitations on total production, but the other one is actually the edge through basically the quality of green products. So happy to go into this lead market theme again later on, because I think this demand side is basically where Europe can do a lot more. And then I think another one where Europe can do more is the whole matter of prioritization. We started with this nice warming up on the hype that we've had, and then we've come down. That certainly hasn't been that helpful. But essentially, I think what we have realized is that the role, well, hydrogen is a scarce good, is a valuable good. The role it's going to play, for example, in domestic heating, I think is no longer in the discussion, really, and likewise for other low-temperature heat applications. And that's right, we should be focusing on the sectors that really need the hydrogen, that cannot electrify, and that is steel, that is chemicals, that is fertilizers, but also aviation, shipping. And they need to make the investment decisions now, as you were outlining. So that's where focus is very much needed. By the way, one that's also quite nicely linked with the lead markets theme that we have again today. And then I think finally what's important is to ensure a level playing field for hydrogen. As we are discussing the framework for low-carbon hydrogen, basically the question, how does this compare with the standards that we have for green? And currently there are a lot of forces out there trying both to push for lax standards on low carbon, for support on low carbon hydrogen. How does that compare with green hydrogen? We need to make sure that we create a level playing field here for renewable hydrogen to really stand a chance, because I think it's clear that the long-term perspective is all on renewable hydrogen.
Thanks. Maybe getting back to you before I come to you again, Christian, Kimmo. You know, how can we make sure that more steel producers, and maybe you don't want to have that competition on green steel, but but you know, more steel producers are following your pathway, you know, are really making the final investment decisions for green steel plants. How can we get them over the line?
First of all, I mean, you always, when a person or when a company is introducing something new to the market, the first mover is always the one who shows somehow it can be done, how it can be done, whether it can be done or not. So you need always somebody who is moving first, not everybody always moving at the same time. So I think we have done it already. And here in the audience are dear colleagues who are doing basically the same thing as we are doing. So I think that is a sign of the fact that indeed we have shown that it can be done. And that is absolutely very important. I mean, this is how change starts. And then when the markets see that something is there, something it's feasible to do something, it is technically possible to do something, then people start to study. And we get a lot of inquiries from all over the world. And it's not a surprise, by the way, for you. We get a lot of inquiries, what kind of technology do you have? Would you be able to share the technology, do something, some cooperation? And now I'm talking countries like India and others. It's not a secret, probably. We have patented our technology.
So that hybrid.
Yes, hybrid technology. Hybrid technology is a joint venture between the Finnish Agora, who is the provider of the iron ore from the Europe's biggest iron ore mine, Vattenfall, who is the supplier of the energy, and then SSAB, which is us. And we get a lot of inquiries, and now people are interested. When I meet my colleagues from South Korea, POSCO and others, when I meet my colleagues from Japan, they are all interested, and they all tell me that they have plans. They are not sitting there and just watching anymore. They have plans to do basically the same thing that we are doing. The technology, strictly speaking, is not the same. I'm an engineer, so I always have a problem in saying that technology is this or that, because there is no two equal, exactly the same kind of technologies. So they are, of course, studying their own technologies. They are developing them based on their own framework, operating conditions. But as said, it will come. Now the question is, to me, more of whether they will again, some of the other countries will bypass Europe if we are too slow on this one. And the slowness, there may be many reasons why we may be slow in generally, but if we are too slow, I wouldn't be surprised. I used to live 6 years in Japan, I have to tell you this. I used to live 3 years in China. And believe me or not, but the whole society, the whole economical systems are much more geared towards industrial performance. They are targeting certain areas and they are acting accordingly. whereas we are more democratic, we discuss, we take our time and debate, and there is an opposition, there is a pro and cons, and sometimes we are too slow. So I wouldn't be surprised if we are too slow. Suddenly what will happen is that we see also some other countries bypassing generally our industry. But it is happening already.
So green steel plants will come, which
Will come.
have to be faster.
We have to be faster.
What I heard from you, Christian, is that there's still a gap for other demand sectors, right?
Yeah.
So what is it that we need to boost competitiveness there of renewable hydrogen?
Yeah.
Is it more regulation? Is that what you're expecting from the
No.
new commission coming in?
No. No more further rules. We already have this discussion about delegated act and whether this is not too much, etc. So don't go into that right now. In fact, it's the very practical understanding that this demand creation needs time, and you need to incentivize those industries in parallel. There's the lowest hanging fruits, maybe the refinery or chemical, but if you leave the market alone and you put same rules to everybody and the funding, you will not manage that because it takes 5 to 10 years on the steel. But there's other big elephants in the room, like the cement. By the way, the fuel project I mentioned before is based on the cement industry. So we take a synergy between decarbonization goals, the cement industry, which has the issue that they have obviously a large bunch of CO2 emissions, both from heat as well as inherent process. On the heat, obviously, we focus on those which are the sweet spot, high temperature, on the low temp. And by the way, Gunnar, somewhere in the room, and gave me the idea to mention on the panel, he's there, that we should do some district heating with the heat here inside the room here and put it out around. So we don't focus on that low temp, but obviously on the high temperature. And this has a value, but you don't get to the same level. So if you think about hydrogen bank, and especially we also mentioned the auction as a service, which now the member states can define. This, for me, one of the key points right now, to define that in a way that you put the right buckets together, that you define not only one, both in the main auction, but also in the member states individual, that you also incentivize other sectors which have another threshold. But still we know they need to be built up. So first project need to happen, and we heard also before, the scaling is essential to get the cost down. So we cannot wait until the market by itself, but in 10 years, the cement is then the one doing after steel has done. We need to do them in parallel. So we need to be a bit more, not more rules, but the way we distribute the funding to get the market starting. And by the way, don't want to be too pessimistic. The projects we are doing, the ceramic or the cement, etc., they're quite in a developed stage. And when you heard before, this kind of 10% only half, and then 90% is not mining, it gets to the 1%. So I felt actually quite good, because I was feeling bad recently in a conference when I had to say, well, this project with the ceramic, we have actually the full amount is clear where to go. So we have, but only 10 to 20%, and now it's a debate where you call it binding or not, but kind of binding we have. So it's not that bad compared to 1%, yeah. But still, we have, in order to get the bankability, we need to make the jump before we should have jumped as well, because some project partners need to jump together right now, because this gap needs to be done. It cannot come all from the funding side, so it needs all partners to make a jump and show entrepreneurship to make it happen.
And this is where lead markets are coming in, right?
Yes, indeed.
So tell us more. You've also been doing a study on steel, I understand, but you're also thought leaders more generally on lead markets. There is the other side of the ones arguing that, you know, all of that, why are we doing it? Shouldn't those industries just move somewhere else in other geographies? But I think there is a solution to it, no? Lead markets.
Yeah. I think, well, lead markets, and also the other question, and that is, what parts of the value chain do we really focus on in Europe and what not? And I think we just had this conversation about, well, we need support along the different parts of the value chain for it to somehow, kick off. Where to start? Well, let me first start on the value chains, and then I go into the lead markets. But essentially, I think it's a given. The decarbonization needs to happen. Yeah. It's decided, but it's also Europe's competitiveness chance, but then it's also given that our energy prices are higher than those in other geographies. And currently, if we look at power, it's 2 to 3 times that of the US and China. Part of the answer is build out renewables as fast as we possibly can to get those prices down. And yet, at the moment, we have the prices that we've got, and we've got to be strategic. And I think the discussion is very often, when it comes to energy-intensive sectors, well, let's try and keep everything we have, possibly not as realistic, or everything will go, as you also painted the picture. But a competitive reality is somewhere in between. It's about being strategic and looking really, what do we need to keep, what do we want to keep, what could we possibly, as parts of the value chain, also cooperate with partners on. And if we take the steel example, the most energy-intensive part is the first part in the value chain, the reduction of the iron.
Exactly.
Where basically you're going into hydrogen to reduce the iron instead of coke and coal. And if we look at the economics there, if you do this process in Brazil, South Africa, Chile, the economics are so much more favorable than doing it in, well, Sweden is actually still quite fine in terms of power prices compared with other parts of Europe. This is a very energy-intensive part, and it's a solution where Europe could effectively look at partnerships with the regions that are both resource-rich and very renewables-rich, to partner on basically the import of this directly reduced iron, so-called hot briquetted iron, HBI, that is actually not that hard to ship. And then basically continue with the value chain here in Europe, keeping the steel industry here, especially the high value creation upper parts of the value chain in Europe, and basically focus on the creation of partnerships that could secure us basically low-cost diversified partnerships. I mean, we have various renewables-rich, resource-rich, stable political countries in the world looking at a diversified portfolio there, so they become basically the leaders on these technology parts. For Europe, that means safeguarding the jobs downstream, also being able to basically focus the support frameworks that we need on those parts of the value chains where we really have a competitive future in Europe. So really focus those subsidies. And also access partnerships or leverage partnerships really to access not only the low-cost energy, but also the critical raw materials that would be part of these value chains and decarbonize global commodity markets. So I think the European interest is pretty clear, but also the interest on the other side. There are a lot of factors to make it interesting. The attraction of FDI, the technology transfer, capacity building in the countries that would become basically the DRI, reduced iron exporters, green economy employment in those countries, long-term offtake agreements with Europe. So there are a lot of factors to make it interesting. So that's basically on the global trade component.
Thanks very much. Apart from steel, are you looking into other sectors as well? So what are the ones?
We are currently assessing the chemical sector, which is of course a lot more complex because you have a variety of products. But I mean, the case of ammonia is a clear one again, where where you can look at ammonia as an industrial pre-product that is much easier traded than green hydrogen would be.
Yeah. I saw you nodding, Kimmo. So
everything is exactly as my colleague here said. For steel, maybe I can bring up one very important thing that we are missing in EU at the moment, apart from the energy security, is the standards and the definition for green steel. And again, I'm sorry, but I'm really focusing only on steel. But as we are now able to produce fossil-free steel, and as our customers, the most loyal customers, 60 of them or so, are willing to take our steel for their own products and use it in their massive manufacturing operations, we are facing a situation where on our borders we we have steel, which is produced with the old-fashioned way, flowing in at lower prices because of the fact that they don't have all the extra costs that we have in EU. And then we have our steel, and there is no whatsoever a definition in terms of the environmental performance of these two steels. So this is a really, really one single individual trade problem that Europe is facing, and basically the name is incoherence between the environmental policy and the trade policies. So environmental policies are ambitious, and we like that, and we have adapted to those ones. But for trade policies, the trade policies don't take into consideration at all at the moment the fact that our products are basically zero emission. And I'm not kidding, it's almost, I mean, it's 20 kilos roughly the emissions when the competition is emitting 2,000 or 3,000 tons per ton of steel. So hundreds and hundreds of times more.
So it's a lack of definition, basically.
Lack of definition that could be used in the trade policies.
Yeah.
And it is not far away from being possible, because basically the trade rules allow the anti-environmental dumping cases to be established if you can show that this product is harmful and this one is not harmful from an environmental perspective. But in reality, so far, the trade policy people have not been courageous enough to support the environmental cause. This, by the way, goes for the other products also, but I'm speaking of steel because I know it. So that is one single thing that we would need, and that would support also the lead market creation.
Yeah.
Because then we could have the public procurement rules saying that certain amount of the public procurement has to be low emission or low carbon or whatever, and that would also create the general public, us consumers, in making our decisions to the direction where there are less emissions in the products that we are buying.
Yeah, I'd like to quickly connect the two, steel and ammonia, which you mentioned. In fact, the ISO 19870 and the ISO 197 TC, they, for hydrogen and also including ammonia, they have defined the rules and what is the standard, and this is obviously for other downstream markets the essential thing to make it work, because then you have kind of a definition which works. And then coming to ammonia, as we know, ammonia is the #1 of projects worldwide, globally, and we, besides having here the demand for sure in Europe, the question is where do we do the projects given all what we discuss, and obviously we are also looking into projects beyond Europe. And there is obviously countries, I can now mention Middle East, Egypt, Morocco, others, where in fact the ammonia is the one which, with the existing definition, the existing infrastructure, the way you can transport, really moves forward. We know, and then maybe I should just mention, because we were saying about applications, I mentioned aviation before, but shipping is the other one with an obligation. We know that Maersk started with the methanol. Everybody said, okay, that's easier, less critical, but I got some confidence seeing the first ammonia-based megawatt scale engine running with everything, with the bunkering and the lines, the double, the vacuum. It runs well, the emissions are good. So with that one, we have a full value chain. There is the definition, we have an application, there is a binding target. So that's why actually the ammonia is now the one which probably is the one who gets the whole industry moving, and probably these projects are only very little in Europe. There will be more somewhere else in terms of generation. In terms of offtake, obviously, Europe is a big one. Okay, so let's look into the future. I see on your watch, because I don't have one, the end, but I still want to take some time to look into the future, and want to ask you, Christian, what are you expecting from the incoming Commission? We had the first hearings. You know, you were talking about we all need to jump together, or different sides need to jump together. So, what is the jump that the Commission needs to make going forward? Yeah. It's not more regulation, you said already. No. Is it less regulation? Faster. The speed. Faster? The speed is a topic. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, to make things actionable and fast and reliable, to give the transparency, and this goes from Commission to the member states in the various sectors, that there is a visibility on the target. What does it really, really mean in the country? What can I expect? I mentioned the CO2 pricing, which is for me a key topic again, and I will repeat it once more. And I think what we didn't, and I tried to hint it, there is a gap which cannot be solved by policy and not by public funding, etc. It needs to be by the private investment side. However, what we need is a kind of a blended support, financing instruments which help for those who start first to de-risk. And so it doesn't mean this is a budget which a government has to put in. It's something which gives a certainty to the bank, to the investor, that they can do a bunch of projects, but there is some kind of backing for them in case 1 or 2 or 3 projects fall out. They need a mechanism to assess, okay? But this is what the Chinese have been doing with solar in the past, if you remember well. That's how they were very successful. They, okay, take our modules, then we do the whole financing, and we'll also pay the whole project, not only by the Chinese Development Bank. This is how they did it. I mean, hydrogen can be a bit similar. We should, in Europe, think about how this gap, when there are entrepreneurs ready to jump, but we still then need investors, financial institutions, and they need a mechanism to de-risk, and it doesn't have to be free money. It can be just blended support.
Blended financial support from your side, what does it need long-term? What do you want the new incoming Commission to do? Clean industrial deals? So what is your wish list?
Definition for green steel, for fossil-free steel, and that definition to be incorporated in the trade policies. This is a big hole. You don't probably, I cannot even express how big hole that is in our policies, because in CBAM you need it, public procurement, you need it for the trade defense instruments. I'm not talking about tariffication and safeguards. I'm talking about the use of normal, existing, long-established WTO compliant trade defense instruments, where you can raise a case, anti-subsidy or anti-dumping case against somebody who is distorting the market. And if we would have the definition accepted and incorporated in the trade policies, then we could have anti-environmental subsidy or anti-environmental dumping cases. That is a big thing. And it is not an easy thing. I just want to let everybody know that yesterday morning I got WTO paper where they are speaking about this, and they are going to present in COP29 in Baku. They summary of what is happening in this era, and it is not easy, because then you have to agree basically globally with the trading partners that this is the way we define. In our case it's fossil-free, but it can be low-emission steel, whatever you want to call it, steel, so that it can be used in all of the policy instruments. So that is actually a very big lead. Other than that, we don't have, honestly speaking, at the moment, very other big sort of asks, except the fact that please, guys, believe in technology. Because I'm old enough to remember the time when we were speaking only about free trade agreements, and we were perfectly happy to do by doing trade with all over the world, because we didn't have to be afraid in terms of our performance competitiveness. Our technology was superior, and that's a matter of fact. I mean, I'm speaking about 20, 30 years ago. So that's how we were able to build up this EU economy. Now, what has happened is that some other countries have been able to develop the technology to our level, and even actually going above our level. So we have lost the technological innovativeness race. So let's put it back on the agenda so that we start to again become innovative and technologically superior, because then we don't have to worry about safeguards and protectionistic measures, and we don't have to worry about things that now are on the table in terms of protecting our industry. That doesn't lead eventually to the high level of welfare. I'm sorry, I get excited. My ex-wife always said after 1 hour, be quiet for a moment.
That is fine, and basically, and it's getting back to what Hakan in the beginning said, we need to put on our yellow jersey and exactly. Race like hell in order to really keep ahead. The last word is for you, Frauke. Same question. You know, what is it that the incoming Commission needs to do? What Dan Jurgensen needs to have on his table and push for So what is the thing that we need to see also in the clean industrial deal? That is the very first thing that we will be seeing from the new commission in the first 100 days.
Of course, there's quite a lot to be done within the clean industrial deal, including electrification, a real strategy in electrification, circular economy. I will focus on those that matter to green hydrogen, and one of those is funding, and the other one is the lead markets. So on the funding side, we really are running into a funding gap, both for the decarbonization of the economy, where estimates some 1 to 2% of GDP is required in terms of funding, in terms of investments, and that coincides with the RRF, which was the main public funding tool, running out. So a couple of elements that are really needed on the side of funding. A reform of the MFF to basically really not only streamline funding, but align it with the investment needs. So a very strategic assessment of what really are the investment needs to channel the funding where it's needed. And it links back to my point on prioritization that I made earlier. In addition to that, we believe that we need a new climate fund. Ursula von der Leyen proposed the competitiveness fund. So within that, we assume some 0.2% of European GDP is needed as a direct European funding tool. That, of course, goes along with national funding. State aid rules should be revised to facilitate especially the clean investments, and at the same time review the currently very broad framework when it comes to conventional fossil to gas investments. And finally, we also need a far-sighted approach on the fiscal risks for member states, who still base a lot of their revenue on energy taxation, fossil taxation, that is set to expire. And at the same time, I think also for the ETS revenues, we'll see an upward trend still, but somewhere in the 2030s, we'll see that coming down. So also there, we need an anticipatory approach to already now work on the funding base, on the tax base, for it to be sustainable. So quite a bit to be done on the funding side. And then I think the most exciting when it comes to green hydrogen is this lead market theme that I think has been mentioned in almost every statement in this panel now, but maybe to pin it down again a bit more. We've had a good start for cement in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, where, of course, green cement basically is a requirement for new buildings. We need something similar for other sectors, for non-building materials. So embodied carbon reporting is step number one, but then also requirements to increase the share of green products or green industrial goods in products such as automobiles or other big equipment to upscale the use of the green industrial products. Then when it does come to buildings, public procurement rules to really increase green basic materials in construction. Beyond that, and we mentioned the international collaboration, private buyer alliances to accelerate the demand, but then also internationally national alliances, be it within the OECD, the Climate Club, alliances as green buyer alliances groups. And then finally, you mentioned the trade dimension and especially the trade defense dimension. And then, of course, there's the complement of that, and that is the trade and investment facilitation, where we need within the specific value chains agreements to facilitate examples like the one I mentioned on the DRI, directly reduced iron trade. And there are many other examples where basically it's not about the massive trade agreements that we're discussing, but specific trade agreements for green products within the specific value chains in order to get those markets going. So it's basically a whole chain of elements that we need to have in place for the green lead markets to really kick off, take off, starting with the labeling, but then very much also triggering the demand, public procurement, requirements, product requirements that basically build the chain for demand to really create a pull on the market and pick up.
So enough work for the incoming commissioner, Dan Jørgensen, with a lot of things that need to happen. Blended support, funding, We need to have the right definition, lead markets, embedded carbon that needs to be made more visible. More generally putting the money where the mouth is, and then also looking into trade and public procurement. Thanks a lot for this great discussion. Thanks a lot for the audience for staying attentive. There's still one panel that is going to follow, which is a fireside chat on infrastructure, which my colleague Arthur is going to lead, I think. But first of all, please give a very warm applause to the fantastic panel.